The night my mother was lowered into the ground, my father came to my room and said, "You shouldn't sleep alone tonight." That night changed everything I believed about love and safety. But I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I? Let me start properly. Good afternoon, my darlings. I'm Eleanor Price, 76 years old, speaking to you from my porch here in Maine. It's late autumn. The leaves are the color of old memories, burnt orange and deep red, falling like tears I should have cried decades ago but couldn't. The air smells of wood smoke and approaching winter, and there's something about this season that always brings me back to that time, that house, that little girl who thought the world was made of sawdust and peach jam. I never thought I'd tell this story on camera. Hell, I never thought I'd tell this story at all. My granddaughter Lily is the reason I finally did. She's 22 now, bright as a new penny and twice as stubborn as I ever was. She said, "Grandma, someone out there might need to hear what you survived." And maybe she's right. Maybe somewhere, someone is sitting in their own darkness, thinking they're the only one who knows what it feels like when the person who's supposed to protect you becomes the thing you need protection from. Where are you watching this from, I wonder? Your bedroom? Your kitchen while dinner cooks? Maybe you're hiding in your car, stealing moments of quiet like I used to steal moments of peace? Wherever you are, I want you to know you're not alone. Not anymore. When I was little, life smelled of sawdust and peach jam. My mother, God rest her soul, sewed dresses for every bride in town. Her fingers moved like magic across silk and satin, creating dreams that would walk down aisles and dance at receptions. The whole house hummed with her singer's sewing machine, this constant, comforting rhythm that meant everything was right with the world. And my father, before everything changed, he built furniture strong enough to outlive us all. Tables that would hold family dinners for generations, chairs that would rock babies to sleep long after we were dust. Our house was small, but it was full. Full of my mother's laughter echoing from the kitchen when she'd burn the biscuits again. Full of my father's whistling as he sanded chair legs in his workshop behind the house. Full of the sound of my own feet running across hardwood floors that he'd laid with his own hands. I thought that's what love was. The smell of wood shavings and the sound of humming. The way my mother would braid my hair while telling me stories about princesses who saved themselves. I was 8 years old and believed in forever. I believed my parents would live to be 100, that our little house would always smell like peach jam and fresh-cut lumber, that nothing bad could ever touch us because we had each other. Children believe in permanence because they have to. Without that belief, how could they sleep at night? How could they run and play and dream if they knew how quickly everything could disappear? But nothing lasts forever, does it? Not peach jam or whistling or mothers who smell like lavender soap and sing off-key while they cook. It began with a cough that never went away. At first, we thought it was just the dust from my father's workshop getting to her lungs. Then we thought it was a cold that wouldn't shake loose. By October, the cough had teeth. By December, it was stealing her breath in the middle of sentences. By winter, my mother was gone, and our home never felt like home again. I remember the funeral like snapshots in an old photo album. Black dresses and casseroles, and people I'd never seen before telling me how sorry they were, how she was in a better place now, how I needed to be strong for my father. I was 9 years old. I didn't want to be strong. I wanted my mother back. I wanted her hands braiding my hair, and her voice singing those off-key lullabies, and her laugh echoing through the kitchen where the biscuits would never burn again. The house felt enormous after she died. Empty in a way that had nothing to do with furniture or belongings and everything to do with the absence of her presence. The sewing machine sat silent in the corner like a monument to everything we'd lost. My father couldn't bear to look at it, but he couldn't bear to move it either. So it just sat there, gathering dust, reminding us every day that the woman who made magic with thread and needle would never come home. He started drinking more. At first, he just forgot dinner on the stove. Beans burned black in the pot while he sat in his workshop, staring at half-finished furniture like he'd forgotten why he'd started building it. Then he forgot to come home for dinner at all. Then he forgot who he used to be. The man who had whistled while he worked became someone who flinched at the sound of laughter. The hands that had built beautiful things started shaking unless they were wrapped around a bottle. The father who used to lift me onto his shoulders to reach the highest apples on our tree began to look at me like I was a stranger, or worse, like I was a reminder of everything he'd lost. I tried to be what everyone said I should be: strong, helpful, a good girl who didn't ask for too much. I learned to make sandwiches when he forgot to buy groceries. I learned to tiptoe through the house when he was sleeping off another night of trying to forget. I learned to make myself small and quiet and invisible because somehow I'd gotten the idea that if I took up less space, maybe there would be more room for the father I remembered to come back. But grief and alcohol are cruel masters, and they don't leave room for anything else. Not for little girls who miss their mothers. Not for fathers who used to build furniture that would last forever. Not for houses that once smelled like peach jam and rang with off-key singing. The drinking got worse. The silences got longer. And slowly, so slowly, I didn't notice at first, something else started changing too. The way he looked at me. The way he stood too close when he helped me reach something on a high shelf. The way his hands lingered when he helped me with my coat. I was 11 when I started locking my bedroom door at night. I told myself it was because I heard noises in the house, creaking floorboards and settling walls. But deep down, I think I knew the truth. I just wasn't ready to face it yet. The first time he came to my room after my mother's funeral, I thought he was checking on me. Maybe making sure I was warm enough, or that I wasn't having nightmares about coffins and black dresses and people telling me to be strong. He sat on the edge of my bed and smoothed my hair back from my forehead the way my mother used to do. "You look so much like her," he whispered, and his breath smelled like the bottles he hid in the workshop. "Sometimes I forget you're not her." I should have known then. Should have understood what was happening. But I was 11 years old, and I missed my mother so much it felt like dying, and if he saw her in me, maybe that meant she wasn't really gone. Maybe that meant I could bring her back somehow, just by being whatever he needed me to be. That's what children do, isn't it? They try to fix things that aren't theirs to fix. They take responsibility for adult pain and adult choices because they don't understand yet that some things can't be healed by being good enough or quiet enough or whatever enough. The visits to my room became more frequent, longer, different. He would sit on my bed and tell me stories about my mother when she was young, before she got sick, before everything went wrong. But his hands would wander while he talked, and his eyes would get this glassy, distant look like he was seeing someone else entirely. "She used to wear her hair like this," he'd say, running his fingers through my hair until it hurt. "She used to sit just like this when she was sewing." I learned to hold very still during these visits, to breathe shallow and think about other things, about the oak tree in our backyard, about the books I was reading at school, about anything except the weight of him sitting on my bed and the smell of alcohol and unwashed clothes and something else I couldn't name but instinctively feared. I was 12 when I saw another father lifting his daughter onto his shoulders in the town square, and for the first time, I understood. Love was never supposed to hurt. Love wasn't supposed to make you hold your breath and count ceiling tiles and pray for it to be over. Love wasn't supposed to leave bruises on your arms and make you wash your sheets in the middle of the night when you thought no one would notice. The little girl on her father's shoulders was laughing. Actually laughing, throwing her head back with pure joy while he spun her around and around under the summer sun. And I realized with a shock that made my knees buckle that I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed like that. Couldn't remember the last time I'd felt safe in my own skin, in my own house, in my own life. That night, when he came to my room again, I tried to tell him to stop. I tried to find words for what was happening, tried to make him see that I wasn't my mother and never could be, and didn't want to be whatever twisted replacement he'd created in his grief-soaked mind. "Please," I whispered, and it was the first time I'd spoken during one of his visits. "Please don't." But please doesn't work on men who've drowned their conscience in cheap whiskey and bitter rage. Please doesn't work on fathers who've forgotten that little girls are supposed to be protected, not used. Please doesn't work when you're 12 years old and he's 6 feet tall, and there's no one left in the world who's supposed to keep you safe. "Sure," he said, and his voice was thick and strange. "Just be still. Just be good. Be like her." That night, he reached for me again, and something inside me snapped quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just watched and waited. I watched him stumble back to his room, listened to him crash into furniture, and curse under his breath. I watched the way moonlight fell across the floor of my bedroom, silver and cold and beautiful. I watched, and I waited, and I planned. Because here's what nobody tells you about surviving. Sometimes the only way out is through. Sometimes being good and quiet and invisible isn't enough. Sometimes you have to become something else entirely, something harder and sharper and more dangerous than the little girl who used to believe in forever. I started paying attention to things I'd never noticed before. The way he moved when he'd been drinking, slow and clumsy and off balance. The way he left tools scattered around his workshop, sharp things and heavy things and things that could hurt if they fell the wrong way. The way he forgot to lock doors and close cabinets and put dangerous things back where they belonged. A week later, in the workshop, the blade that once shaped beauty found his hands instead. Everyone said it was an accident. I never corrected them. You want to know what it felt like? It felt like breathing underwater and finally breaking the surface. It felt like waking up from a nightmare that had lasted 2 years and realizing the monster was gone and wouldn't be coming back. It felt like justice served cold and sharp and final. I remember the blood, the neighbors, the ambulance, but mostly I remember the silence afterward. The kind that doesn't scare you anymore because it's empty of threat instead of full of it. The kind of silence that means you can sleep through the night without listening for footsteps in the hallway. The kind of silence that means tomorrow might actually come. They said it was tragic. Poor little Eleanor, losing both parents so young. They whispered about how the grief must have driven him to distraction, how working with sharp tools when you're not paying attention is always dangerous. They talked about how accidents happen and how sometimes God calls people home before their time. I let them talk. I nodded when they patted my head and told me how sorry they were for my loss. I accepted their casseroles and their sympathy and their assumptions about what had happened in that workshop on a Tuesday afternoon when the light was slanting through dirty windows and justice finally came to call. The truth is, I wasn't sorry. Not then, not now, not ever. Some deaths are tragedies. Others are mercy. His was both, maybe, mercy for me, tragedy for whatever was left of the man he used to be before grief and alcohol and his own twisted needs turned him into something monstrous. My brother took me to the city. We shared one mattress in a rented room and called it freedom. He was 18 and working construction and had no idea how to raise a 12-year-old girl who flinched when men raised their voices and couldn't sleep without checking the locks on the doors 3 times. But he tried. God love him, he tried. I started writing in a notebook someone left on the bus. That's how I learned to breathe again. Words poured out of me like poison being drawn from a wound. Angry words and hurt words and words I'd never been allowed to say out loud. I wrote about the smell of sawdust and peach jam. I wrote about funeral dresses and black soil and fathers who forgot how to be human. I wrote about the weight of silence and the sound of breaking and the way moonlight looks when you're planning to save your own life. Writing became my church, my confession, my salvation. Every word I put on paper was a step further away from that house and that workshop and that little girl who thought being good enough could keep the monsters at bay. Every sentence was proof that I had survived, that I was more than what had been done to me, that my story didn't end in that bedroom where I learned to count ceiling tiles and hold my breath. The city was loud and dirty and beautiful in ways I'd never imagined. It was full of people who didn't know my story, didn't look at me with pity or whispered assumptions about what I'd been through. I could be anyone there. I could be Eleanor who wrote stories and worked in a bookshop and dreamed of being a teacher someday. I could be Eleanor who laughed too loud at movies and ate ice cream for breakfast and stayed up too late reading novels that made her believe in happy endings again. I finished high school and went to college on a scholarship for students who'd overcome adversity. That's what they called it, adversity. Like what happened to me was a test I'd passed instead of a nightmare I'd survived. But I took their money and their pity and their assumptions, and I turned them into something better. I studied literature and psychology and education. I learned about trauma and healing and the 1,000 different ways people can be broken and then choose to put themselves back together. I met Robert when I was 23 and teaching at a small school outside Boston. He was a librarian with gentle hands and a quiet laugh, and eyes that never looked at me like I was damaged goods. He courted me like we were living in one of the romance novels I'd started reading in my spare time, bringing me flowers and leaving poems in my mailbox and never, ever pushing for more than I was ready to give. The first time he kissed me, I cried. Not because it hurt or because it scared me, but because it was gentle. Because his hands stayed where they belonged and his eyes stayed on my face, and he pulled back the moment he felt me tense. "We don't have to do anything you don't want to do," he said, and I realized that was the first time any man had ever said those words to me. "We have all the time in the world. All the time in the world." What a gift that was. Time to heal, time to trust, time to learn that love doesn't have to hurt, and safety isn't something you have to fight for with sharp tools and careful planning. We were married 2 years later in a small ceremony with daisies and string music and vows we wrote ourselves. My brother walked me down the aisle, and when the minister asked who gives this woman in marriage, he said, "She gives herself." Because by then, I belonged to myself again. By then, I knew the difference between love and possession, between protection and control, between a man who builds beautiful things and one who destroys them. Robert and I had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. And with each of them, I had to learn how to be a mother without a model for what that looked like. I had to figure out how to protect them without smothering them, how to love them without needing them to fix my own broken places, how to give them the childhood I'd never had without pretending that what happened to me hadn't shaped who I became. When my daughter Sarah was 12, the same age I was when everything changed, I watched her sleep one night and wondered if I was doing it right. If I was giving her enough freedom to be a child, while still keeping her safe from the monsters I knew lived in the world. If I was teaching her to trust her instincts without teaching her to fear every shadow. She stirred in her sleep and opened her eyes, found me sitting in the chair beside her bed. "Mom, are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just watching over you." "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, baby. More than you'll ever know." And I realized then that I'd done it. I'd broken the cycle. I'd raised a daughter who could sleep peacefully in her own bed, who could say, "I love you," without fear, who would never have to learn to count ceiling tiles or plan her own rescue. Whatever else I'd done or failed to do in my life, I'd given her that gift, the gift of safety in her own home, in her own skin, in her own life. The years passed like pages in a book. Robert and I grew old together in the best possible way, slowly and gratefully, and still holding hands when we walked through the park on Sunday afternoons. Our children grew up and moved away and started families of their own, carrying with them the lessons we tried to teach about love and respect and the sacred responsibility of protecting those smaller and more vulnerable than yourself. Robert died 3 years ago this December. Cancer, quick and merciless, and nothing like the slow, deliberate cruelty I'd known as a child. He died in our bed surrounded by family, holding my hand and telling me he loved me right up until the end. It was a good death, if such a thing exists, peaceful and dignified, and full of love instead of fear. 50 years later, I sit here surrounded by peace I built myself. I plant lavender every spring. It's the only scent that never reminds me of fear. My garden is full of herbs and flowers and vegetables I grow with my own hands, hands that know how to create instead of destroy, how to nurture instead of harm. I have bird feeders and wind chimes and a porch swing where I drink my morning coffee and watch the sun come up over the mountains. My granddaughter Lily comes to visit every few weeks. She brings her laptop and her dreams of changing the world and her absolute certainty that her grandmother is some kind of superhero. She doesn't know the details of my story, not all of them, but she knows I survived something terrible and came out stronger on the other side. "How did you do it, Grandma?" she asked me last month. "How did you get through something so awful and still believe in love?" I thought about it for a long time before I answered her. How do you explain to someone young and hopeful and untouched by real darkness that sometimes the only way to survive is to become someone you never thought you could be? How do you tell her that strength isn't something you're born with, but something you forge in fire and blood and desperate necessity? Because the alternative was letting him win, I finally said. And I was never going to let him win. The truth is more complicated than that, of course. The truth is that healing isn't a straight line from broken to whole. It's a spiral that loops back on itself, touching the same wounds over and over again until slowly, gradually, they stop bleeding. It's learning to trust yourself, and then learning to trust others, and then learning that sometimes trust is misplaced, but that doesn't mean you should stop trying. The truth is that some nights, even now, I still wake up listening for footsteps in the hallway. Some days, when a man stands too close behind me in line at the grocery store, I have to remind myself that not all men are dangerous, that most touch is meant kindly, that I am safe in my own life now. The truth is that trauma leaves scars, and scars ache sometimes when the weather changes. But the deeper truth is this: I am not what was done to me. I am what I chose to do about it. I am not the terrified little girl who counted ceiling tiles and planned her own rescue. I am not the broken teenager who wrote poison words in a stolen notebook. I am not even the cautious young woman who cried the first time someone kissed her gently. I am Eleanor Price, 76 years old, sitting on my porch in Maine with lavender in my garden and love letters from my late husband tucked away in a shoebox upstairs. I am a mother and grandmother and retired teacher who spent 40 years helping other people's children learn to read and write and think and dream. I am a survivor who chose to build a life worth surviving for. If someone you love is hurting you, that's not love. I know it's hard to hear when you're in the middle of it, when leaving feels impossible and staying feels like dying slowly. I know how easy it is to make excuses and minimize and tell yourself it could be worse. I know how the isolation creeps in, how the shame builds up like scar tissue around your heart until you can't imagine anyone understanding or believing or caring enough to help. But listen to me. Tell someone.
Speak.
Use whatever voice you have, however small and scared it might be.
Call a hotline.
Tell a teacher or a doctor or a neighbor. Write it down if you can't say it out loud. Leave notes where someone will find them. Do whatever you have to do to break the silence that keeps you trapped. There's help. There are people whose job it is to believe you and protect you and help you find a way out. There are shelters and lawyers and counselors and advocates who understand what you're going through because they've either lived it themselves or dedicated their lives to helping others escape it. Most importantly, there's tomorrow. There's a life waiting for you on the other side of this nightmare, a life where you sleep peacefully and laugh without fear and love, without looking over your shoulder. There's a future where what happened to you becomes part of your story, but not the end of it, where your scars become proof of your strength instead of marks of your shame. I can't promise it will be easy. Healing never is. I can't promise it will be quick or that there won't be setbacks and bad days and moments when you wonder if it was worth it to fight so hard for a life that still hurts sometimes. But I can promise you this. You're stronger than you know. You are braver than you believe. You are worthy of love that doesn't hurt and safety that doesn't have to be earned. You are worthy of a life where your greatest fear isn't the person who claims to love you. I planted my garden with these hands that once held a blade when mercy wore the face of justice. I raised children with this heart that learned to trust again after it was broken into pieces. I loved a good man for 47 years with lips that once counted ceiling tiles instead of blessings. I built a beautiful life from the ashes of a childhood that should have destroyed me. If I can do it, angry and broken and 12 years old with nowhere to turn and no one to save me, then you can too. Whatever age you are, whatever situation you're in, whatever resources you have or don't have, you can find a way out. You can find your way to safety and healing and a future that belongs to you and no one else. The leaves are falling again outside my window, orange and red like the memories I've finally made peace with. In a few weeks, winter will come to Maine with all its cold beauty and stark honesty. And come spring, I'll plant lavender again in the garden I tend with hands that know how to create instead of destroy. If this story reached you in any way, type, "I'm listening" in the comments. Maybe someone scrolling through will see your words and finally ask for help. Maybe someone who needs to know they're not alone will find courage in the chorus of voices saying, "We hear you, we believe you, we're here." And if you can, subscribe, not for numbers but to keep this space of courage alive. Because stories like mine need to be told, and survivors like us need to know we're not alone in the dark. We need to know that speaking truth about terrible things doesn't make us damaged or broken or too much to handle. It makes us human. It makes us real. It makes us warriors in the best possible way. The sun is setting now, painting the sky the color of hope and redemption. Somewhere out there, someone is making the hardest decision of their life. Someone is finding the courage to say no more and mean it. Someone is discovering that they are worth saving, worth fighting for, worth a future that doesn't include fear. I'm rooting for you, whoever you are. I'm sending you all the strength I found in that workshop 50 years ago, all the healing I've gathered in the years since, all the love I've learned to give and receive without condition or compromise. Your story doesn't end with what was done to you. It begins with what you choose to do about it. And whatever you choose, know that somewhere in Maine, an old woman with lavender in her garden and hope in her heart is believing in your courage and your strength and your absolute right to a life that belongs entirely to you. The night my mother was lowered into the ground, my father came to my room and changed everything I believed about love and safety. But 50 years later, sitting on my porch with the scent of lavender in the air and the sound of wind chimes singing in the breeze, I can tell you this: he didn't get to write the ending. I did. And so can you.
So can you.